Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about information behaviors of Spanish-speaking Latinx. My name is Dr. Mónica Colón Aguirre, and I hope you enjoy this presentation. So I'll be sharing this information with you in the form of um, a little slideshow that I have created for the purposes of this presentation. Sorry, trying to move something here. So the title of this presentation is Factors Affecting Information Behaviors of Spanish-Speaking Latinx in the United States. So let's go into a little bit of the introduction. As I had mentioned before, my name is Mónica Colón Aguirre, and I am an assistant professor at the School of Information Science at the University of South Carolina. I have many research areas, but one of them is information behaviors and practices of Spanish speakers in the United States. Today's topic would be centered around the areas of application for libraries to create services and strategies for Spanish speakers in the United States. So let's talk a little bit about the definitions. So Spanish-speaking Latinx is the term that I use in this presentation. Why do we use Latinx here? Well, the topic is also explored a lot in the literature as Hispanic. Hispanic is not an incorrect term. It is the term accepted by the U.S. Census Bureau. It defines the Hispanic population as those of Cuban, Mexican, Puerto Rican, South or Central American, or other Spanish culture or origin regardless of race. So this is important here. The term Latino or Latina, it's used even in broader terms. Here we include populations such as Brazilians, for example, who don't speak Spanish, they actually speak Portuguese. So the term here we will be using Spanish-speaking Latinx because the term Hispanic has some connotations, negative connotations, historically in the United States. However, I am going to be very likely going to be switching back and forth between Latinx, Hispanic, precisely because in the literature, the information that is relevant for this study appears as Hispanic. So just wanted to give you a heads up. So why do we consider this population? As of 2023, the population of Hispanic population in the United States, according to the Census Bureau, accounts for 18.9% of the United States total population. That accounts for roughly almost 65 million inhabitants. It is the largest racial ethnic minority currently living in the United States. Back in 2015, the Pew conducted research specifically of how this population was using libraries, specifically public libraries, and their services. And what they found out is that this population is the least likely to use the services offered by public libraries, but the reasons for this remains basically unexplored or has been explored in very, very limited terms. So one of the things that we find we have found in our research, I'm part of this research with Dr. Janet Ceja, has been that the information needs of Spanish speakers in the United States tend to be very complex, and they tend to be influenced heavily by the US political climate. And that requires archivists, librarians, and other information professionals to actually engage in very specialized forms of information literacy, including records management, etc. So one disclaimer that I will make here is that Latinx populations are not monolithic. So we're talking here, we're putting a huge swath of the population into the aspects that the commonalities, but in reality, when we look closely, we have a huge range of races, nationalities, countries of origin. And all of these are going to have an influence in the population's stories, their cultures, and the way, and those things actually are going to affect their experiences in the United States. And yes, I'm going to be talking specifically in the United States context, not necessarily the participants or the population in their native country. So, some Latinx populations in the United States that we can consider Latinx, and this is only the basics, include those who are US born. So that includes people who are first generation. So parents came from Latin American countries, but they were born here in the United States. But it also includes born citizens of the United States, including those of us like me who are Puerto Rican and happen to be Hispanic, Latino, Latinx of born citizen, but in Puerto Rico, because it is an actual territory of the United States. You also have people who are foreign born, so people who were born in other countries in Central, South America, or the Caribbean. You have second generation plus, so second, third, fourth generation, and so forth, that still define themselves as Hispanic or Latino. And you also have non-Spanish speakers, which is very important to point out here. So some people, like you might be thinking, well, second, third generation, etc., are more likely to actually speak English rather than Spanish as their main language. So they're not English language learners. However, even in what we would consider Hispanic or Spanish speaking countries, we might encounter individuals who are not speaking Spanish. So Spanish is not their first language. We include here native languages, for example, Quechua, Guarani, Nahuatl. These are spoken in different countries, and it accounts for a huge population that uses these languages as their first language. So you might encounter the case, and I have talked to school librarians particularly who were very committed in their work, and they wanted to create a Spanish collection because they had a lot of students, let's say from Mexico or from Guatemala. The case that I'm specifically talking about was a friend who had a lot of students from Guatemala. And so she was creating this Spanish collection in her library for the children in the school so that they could see something familiar and read something that was familiar to them. Well, the issue became that the students didn't speak Spanish at all. So they were acquiring English as part of the school system. They were in English acquisition classes. So they were English language learners. So they spoke more English than they did Spanish because they spoke, in the case of this person that I'm talking specifically, the students were from Southern Mexico, and they actually mostly spoke Nahuatl, which is a native language. So they didn't speak Spanish at all. So you have to do, this is one of the things that comes along when we consider Spanish speaking Latinx and or even Hispanic populations, is that not everybody speaks Spanish. I know it's kind of complicated. So that underpins some of the other points I want to make in this presentation. So let's go specifically at the case of Spanish speakers in the United States. So from my own research with Dr. Janet Ceja, sometimes she appears as Dr. Janet Ceja, sometimes she appears as Dr. Janet Alcala because she doesn't hyphenate. So she's Dr. Janet Ceja Alcala. So our research, we have conducted research together with the Spanish-speaking population in the United States, specifically in the Northeast of the United States, which is not known historically as a Hispanic or a Latino enclave. That usually goes to the Southwest of the United States. That's basically where the largest populations are. But we have seen that spread throughout the United States, that it is with 18.9% of the population, you are very likely to find Spanish speakers anywhere in the United States. So from our research, we have found out that one of the most salient features linked to use of libraries, particularly in information centers, including archives, museums, etc., it's related to socioeconomic class. And this is something that we rarely discuss in the literature. Some of the manifestations of socioeconomic class include educational attainment. So people who have higher educational attainment tend to be on a higher socioeconomic class than those who don't. And that affects their relationship with the library and their views about education and other aspects. And we also have the issue of English language acquisition. So English language acquisition is also closely related to socioeconomic class, at least in our research results. And that was kind of like not super surprising, but it was unexpected for us to find that the relationship was so strong. So there were other aspects like type of employment, whether blue collar or white collar work or employment, but these were the very strong correlations. So specifically, when we look at the information, the needs for information, they varied. But for people with lower socioeconomic class, the actual information needs revolved around health services. So locating either free or affordable healthcare, particularly healthcare that could be provided in their language or that had access to interpreters who could speak Spanish because they could not express or communicate well enough in English. And that became a challenge. And not surprisingly, children's schooling was a huge, huge component for these individuals. Most of them, actually, yeah, most of the people we interviewed did have children, except for one person who didn't have children in the household. So they either had children in the household or were living with their children. And so sending children to school, the process of sending children to school, the process of school selection, which in many cases, you don't select your public school, your children go to the school that is assigned to them. And in some cases, it's not the school in the neighborhood. This system was extremely complicated for them. And again, they needed interpreters in the school system because they could not understand what was going on, because that's not how it works at home. So the culture of going to the school in the neighborhood, that's not necessarily what they were encountering in the United States, where they were in a place that employed systems like busing, in which students would be sent by bus into another neighborhood to attend school over there. And last but not least, housing. We were conducting research in the Northeast of the United States, extremely expensive market for housing. I expect that if we replicated the study nowadays, we would see even more of this because of the unaffordability of finding appropriate and adequate housing. And again, most of the participants in our research were lower socioeconomic class who had low English proficiency. They were English learners and low educational attainment. So locating suitable housing for them and in many cases for their family was extremely challenging. And linguistic barriers were part of this, but also socioeconomic class barriers. So in the past research, we had encountered these patterns of participants with higher levels of education mentioning that they use the library collections and facilities the most. However, they still needed to get familiar with the systems because the cultural aspects were different. So one participant who had acquired a degree in his native country mentioned how it was surprising in the United States to encounter a library where they could see the materials. They had open stacks because where they came from, the libraries operate in a closed stacks system. So therefore they only get access to a catalog. They write down, locate material, write it down, the call number, and hand it to somebody who will go and fetch the material and give it to them. They don't get access to actually touching the collection. So those with lower socioeconomic or education mentioned library as mostly used to seek services for children, mostly to support the children's education or educational development. So even if it was for leisure purposes, like getting videos, one of the participants said that they always wanted to look for educational videos. So it wasn't just like watching a movie for fun. It was like watching a movie for fun or watching a video for fun that they could have they could learn something, and it could provide something beyond just entertainment. So quality education and leisure coming together. So some of the recommendations that I have based on my work, both for librarians and library science educators, would be the importance. I want to highlight the importance of community engagement. It is essential for Spanish-speaking Latinx living in the United States. It is one of the many ways we can actually start creating bridges with this community. The linguistic differences are a huge barrier in some cases for use. In some cases, it just like they would use the library no matter what, even if they didn't have Spanish speaking employees. However, the issue became the awareness about the research and the materials and actually the way the library works. So I would include aspects such as having space in open houses. So if you work in a academic library, but mostly in a school library, or if you work in a public library, creating an open house for Spanish-speaking Latinx individuals, in which the purpose of the library is explained. So how does it work? Like you get a library card, and how to get a library card, and what do you get with your library card? What are the rules of the library? You're gonna get this material, but and it's gonna be like 2 weeks, and then you have to return it. So explaining the rules is important because a lot of participants, especially those who were born outside of the United States, their culture and their access to libraries is completely different. And even the culture around libraries is different. Think of the participant I told you about, who is a user of libraries, has always been a user of libraries, but was used to closed stacks. Whereas in the United States, the bulk of libraries work is in open stacks. You are there and you see the stacks, and you actually pick the materials you like. You can see the collection and pick on your own. So also the operations of the library. So how do things work? What are the materials that I have? How do I borrow materials? How do I return them? These things are important. Programming also that brings together people of different socioeconomic classes. So here we have this thing in the United States that I think bulk of what I have found is libraries offer a lot of ESL classes, so English learning, English as a second language courses. However, how effective they are is on the fence. From the participants in my research, out of the ones that didn't speak English, they had all indicated having taken the ESL classes in the library. However, the bulk of them mentioned as well that they were not feeling like they could communicate well in English or well enough. So going beyond the creation of English as a second language courses, supporting more programs that have more opportunities for socialization in which learning English can be included. So having coffee time together or a coffee hour together, and like trying to establish communication in English, for example, having conversation groups, having, I don't know, knitting groups in which people get together and learn how to knit, but then actually intermingling and mixing English. This would be something that I would recommend. This brings together the interest of people from different socioeconomic classes, but it also moves beyond the provision of formal English lessons or classes into something more like applications and how to apply what they have learned in English learning classes. We also have, I have a recommendation of building rapport with community members who can advocate for information organizations. So this goes for libraries, archives, museums, etc. This is basically word of mouth. The community, Spanish-speaking community in the United States tends to stay together, tends to stay closely together. We see each other and we're like, we try to speak in Spanish to each other. We ask ourselves, where are you from? The moment you meet somebody, we coincide in specific spaces, be it the Latin American market or Hispanic food stores or like some of them even by nationality, and we have conversations. And so it's important to think about the word of mouth, getting the word out about the services that you have for these specific populations by having advocates within the community. So bring in somebody, and that person will get the message out to others. So building those relationships with these individuals is also very important. Things like creation of bilingual catalogs and signage is very important. Some of my participants have noticed the lack of bilingual signage, for example, in libraries in the Northeast area, an area that actually prides itself in its diversity and in cultures and awareness of other cultures. My participants even pointed out, it's like, well, one goes to the library and the only signage is in English. They don't even have signs in Spanish. They don't have signs in other languages. It's not just Spanish. And contrary, I live here now in the South, and in one of the libraries, I am aware that the librarians have a group dedicated to helping each other in translating signage, specifically to Spanish, because they have a significant Spanish population and they want to respond to their needs. So you have that situation in which even something as small as creating a sign in another language can be extremely helpful. Having both languages, even more so, because if you see the term in English with the term in your native language, eventually you start putting two and two together. And if you move to another setting where the only sign is in English, you have an awareness. It's like, oh, I recognize that word. It's the same with the catalog. So we have all of these collections, and we can have English learning materials, but if representation in the catalog is not, it's only in English and navigation is only in English, we might be deterring some English language learners from actually becoming more independent searchers. And some people really want to do it on their own. They don't want to be bothering the librarian all the time or a library employee all the time. So they would rather do it themselves. Last but not least, my optimal solution to this issue would be the hiring of librarians that culturally represent the people in their communities. As a profession, we have not done stellarly in this aspect. The numbers of librarians of minoritized race or ethnic groups keeps being basically dismal. So we need more. We need more diversity among our ranks. Other aspects, especially for considerations for LIS educators when serving non-English language speakers, or in this includes Spanish language speakers. What we have is the issues of cultural competence and non-English language acquisition. And I think those go hand in hand. So I'm going to present some definitions. At the very least, I would like information science, or I would recommend information science education to embrace or foster at least cultural competence. Here on the first block, you can see the definition by the APA, which is loosely defined is the ability to understand and appreciate and interact with people from cultures or belief systems different than one's own. So having that awareness and educating ourselves about what are the differences between other cultures and how can we serve or help others in those cultures without overstepping the cultural boundaries. That would be part of cultural competence. However, one step above would be cultural humility. And I would highly recommend that we start aiming at cultural humility, especially when we are educating the next generation of library and information science professionals. Cultural humility on the lower block, you can see the definition, which is the cultural humility is a lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique, whereby the individual not only learns about another's culture, but one starts with the examination of their own beliefs and cultural identities. So it's not just having an awareness of others and being able to work with others who are of different who come from different cultural backgrounds than ourselves, is creating an appreciation for the others, in the other individual's culture. And that includes important aspects as avoiding proselytizing or trying to make others fit into my culture, whereas I can actually meet in the middle culturally, or I can actually go and cross over to understand their culture. So that would be a step above, in my opinion, the cultural humility. But at the very least, we should be educating our students towards cultural competence. Non-English language acquisition essential according to the findings of my own research. Latinx in the United States, as cited here, are one of those groups that are less likely to acquire English because we don't need English to survive in the United States. We tend to live in enclaves. We tend to live together in neighborhoods with people who also come from other Latin American and Spanish-speaking countries. So we don't have that pressing need for survival to speak English. So therefore, having students learn a few important phrases, a few important words. I'm not asking here for people to go on and just like get a master's degree in Spanish or write a dissertation in Spanish, but basic courses in Duolingo in which the individual can learn how to identify us or how to speak certain phrases and what do they mean. And actually, again, meet the patron in the middle instead of having the patron do all the work to have to learn English. Like, put yourself in their place, try to learn Spanish so that you can understand better how their frustration and understand better their process. Also, again, resources like Mango and Duolingo can help. It doesn't have to be formalized education, and it doesn't have to be perfect. Also creating courses that include topics related to immigrants' rights, pathway to citizenship, legal literacy. So it's not just about English, learning English and speaking the language. It's also the cultural and complex cultural environment and how those are going to affect the way we provide services and the actual information needs we will have to respond for our patrons. So that would be for educators and also for practitioners. So in conclusion, social class and immigration status affect people's access to education in major, and it's a major variable to address when preparing students to be culturally competent and developing services for one of the largest underserved populations in this country, that is the Spanish-speaking population. Also, Spanish-speaking populations in the United States are large, they're multicultural, and they're multiracial groups. And we all have our unique histories and cultures, and we face a variety of barriers to social mobility. And therefore, LIS professionals must take the time to engage with their community and establish collaborations with potential users and other organizations. Is too big, too broad. We cannot do this by ourselves. We need the help of others. Engagement is the key here. And so that is it for what I had prepared for this presentation. Again, my name is Dr. Mónica Colón Aguirre. Here you can find my contact information at the University of South Carolina. And here are the references that I have used in this presentation. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing this information with me. I hope this is useful to you.